And again, this is a guy 87 years old. This is pretty good for an 87-year-old
It's really good.
who's going to be dead in a month. This is pretty good. Okay, and so this was the original cover that I talked about of Contract with God. This was printed by a small publisher, a friend of Will's. As I said, Will subsidized it. He was he was comfortable enough that he could spend, a year working on a project like this. And this was, this was there's a very sad, depressed figure walking up a slum staircase, being soaked in Eisenspritz. Next, please. And the story, I mean, what later was revealed, although not until not that long, just a few years before Will died, this lead story, the one called Contract with God, is about a very pious Jewish guy whose daughter has died as a teenager, and the repercussions in his life. Well, it turns out that Will and Ann Eisner had a teenage daughter who died of leukemia. And she had been, by all reports, the archetypal, cheerful, happy-go-lucky, vivacious teenager, and then was stricken down by this. And Will was devastated, as you would imagine. And so it came out in this story about, next please, about this pious man who, as a young man, made what he believed was a contract, what he called a contract with God, an agreement through prayer that if he obeyed all the laws and strictures of Orthodox Judaism, that he would not suffer any undue tragedy. But so this is Will's, but then he does. And so this is Will's way of working it out, and Will's attempt to enter into the world of Bellow and Malamud and Roth. Next, please. This is probably the most famous pages. I mean, look at this page. This is where Eisner even more, although it's not as the style doesn't call as much attention to itself as the spirit, layout and design, but still, this is a lot of what he did in the graphic novels. There's no panel borders. The panels kind of dissolve into one another, and yet it works. The storytelling couldn't be clearer. And then, oh my God, that last panel of that effect that you get when you look at lightning and you see the lightning is black and the sky is white. Well, holy crap! Will Eisner just did that on a third of a small page. Right? Interesting. He drew this. This came out, I don't know, maybe like 8, maybe 5.5 by 8 or 5. Yeah, it's small.
Smaller than a usual comic.
Yeah, smaller than a comic. More of a paperback size, a large paperback, but not, Eisner, not only did he draw it pretty much print size, but it's turned out, and we'll see more of this, he inked it on vellum. In other words, he inked it on overlays, so the pencils still exist. The pencil work for this entire book exists separately from the inks, which is, anybody I know who inks, that's a really, I mean, you can do it, but most people don't like to do it. It's on what's called vellum, which is a kind of specialized paper that doesn't always hold ink the way, but Will, I'm not, and nobody's really, maybe Dennis Kitchen knows why, but it's not really clear why he would have done that, because he didn't sell the originals. The originals only recently have started being sold by his estate. Next, please. So here's some more pictures. So the guy loses his faith and he becomes a creep and a ruthless businessman, and all the things that he didn't want to become, he becomes. But and then it's got an ironic, next please, it's got an ironic O. Henry style ending. These are some of the other stories in it. This is called Cocheline, if you wondered how to pronounce that. And it again goes back to Will's childhood and youth in the Jewish Bronx of the 30s, Cocheline was a very modest kind of cabin up in the Catskill Mountains in New York State. And so anybody who could afford to or could get a job at one of these resorts would get out of the slums of the Bronx. Next, please. And so, and this is a story about a guy, several different people, and it's a really dark, I mean, the thing about Contract with God and a lot of Will's work, it's very dark. These are not, these may be people that you can sympathize with or relate to, but a lot of them are not very nice people. But this is even Will, even here, toying with autobiography. The two kids looking down, and the father, I guess the mother is saying, "Come on, kids, we're leaving. We'll be late, Willie." Next, please. And this is really Will, and this is about Will's 15-year-old Will Eisner losing his virginity, which is, again, not what you would have seen in The Spirit. And it's a wild story, and it's about this older married woman who seduces Will in this barn at the resort, and yet it could in a way be a spirit story. I mean, it's drawn, so expressively, and she, comes to visit him at night. Next, please. And then, of course, I don't want to give away the ending. B, you should read it. I mean, it's an incredible story for a guy who comes out of the golden age of comics and stretching creative muscles. So this is they're back in the city, and I think maybe his father, I think maybe had a girlfriend, or for some reason his father gets kicked out of the house, and his mother is now saying, "No, Willie, vacation's over already, so start getting ready for school. This year you're going to have lots of responsibility around here. Your father is going to be traveling a lot, so he'll be the man of the house now. You hear me, Willie? Willie?" I mean, so this is, as great as Jack Kirby or Joe Kubert, Kubert actually did a lot of autobiographical stuff. As great as Kirby was, I don't think we ever saw the story of Jack. Jack did one or two stories. There's one famous one called Street Code.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was Eisner's work for the rest of his life, pretty much. This was 78. He didn't die till 2005. And this is a page he added, I think, for a deluxe edition, just a different view. And I mean, again, this is Will Eisner at a time, if he's approximately in his early, he's like 60 or 61 here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of 61-year-old cartoonists, especially of that generation, who are suddenly discovering new storytelling muscles they never knew they had. And I think this additional page was maybe even done 10 years after that. So that's why we're spending 3 hours talking about Will Eisner. I think we're getting near the end, everybody. Don't
I appreciate it.
Okay, let me keep next. And so Will kept going with a series. This was a thing called The Dreamer, which we talked about before, which talks about the comics business and the people in it at the time. Next. I think we can start sort of flipping a little more quickly. I think you get the idea.
Because The Dreamer is basically what you just presented.
Right.
Up to now.
And that's and it's him, and then The Heart of the Storm is really maybe his greatest work of all. It's
really
about his life growing up as a kid, and his and sort of how he went from being this naive kid in the Bronx to how he got into doing The Spirit and encountering anti-Semitism, in the streets of New York and in the army. And it's an incredibly crafted story. I mean, if you only read one Will Eisner graphic novel, even more than Contract with God, I'd say Heart of the Storm. Next, please. These are some pages from it. It's told as a series of flashbacks of Will reporting for duty in the army.
It is like, I'll say that, Contract with God gets a lot of praise, deservedly so, for being first. But, you should hope that if he kept it going, then the others will, be at
Oh
least
yeah.
as good. So
And again, the fact, I don't know when the right place for this anecdote is, so I'll throw it in here. There's an interview on a writer named David Haydu who wrote The 10-Cent Plague, did with Will. I think it was published maybe in the Comics Journal. Will and David are in a New York City Barnes and Noble, and they're in the graphic novel section. And David says to Will, did you ever think you'd live to see the day? And isn't it amazing that not only is there a graphic novel section, but within the graphic novel section, there's a Will Eisner section. Isn't that amazing? And Will says, yeah, it's okay. But I should be over in literature with Malamud and Roth and Bellow. I'm chronicling the same tales of Jewish American life in the first half of the 20th century. They are. Why am I not over? So yeah, I'm sure Will was, but
yeah, I
so
get
that
it.
was, I thought, an interesting, I don't know, just story.
He didn't want to be categorized according to his medium,
He didn't. He felt he wanted to be categorized
according to his content.
the content and the seriousness he brought to it.
Yeah.
That it wasn't, two guys in spandex punching each other. So next, these are some pages. Again, you should read the book, but this is Will's interpretation of his father's, or I guess it's his mother, talking about their parents, when they came to America in the 1880s and other eras. Next, please. I mean, it's just
beautiful. It's beautiful.
It flashes back to Vienna in 1910. This is a guy who's been doing this for 40 plus years, and he's not only not resting on his laurels, he's doing one of these a year. He's doing a graphic novel a year, and he's teaching, and he's writing textbooks, and he's in his 70s or 80s. Next, please. I found this interesting, for a particular reason. If you look at that upper, this is part of, I forget which one it's from, if it's Heart of the Storm, one of the others, but it's Will as a kid doing the typical cartoonist thing, which is, having the other kids in the neighborhood not beat him up because he can draw well. But look, go to the next one. I have a close up. It's little Will Eisner drawing Lindy's airplane. Now, if you know your history at all, Lindbergh's airplane, before Lindbergh became a virulent anti-Semite and an isolationist, when he was still a hero, was called the Spirit of St. Louis. So I have no idea if Will took the name for the Spirit from that at all, but I just, and I think Will must know that because he doesn't say the name of it. He says, wow, he drew Lindy's airplane. Gee, you're some good draw. So that's a nice little piece of inside baseball there. Next, please. And then this is Will. I think this is in To the Heart of the Storm. Here's a guy who likes him. I think he's a guy. I'm not sure if he's the guy who owned the syndicate that bought the Spirit. I forget the exact context, but here's a guy who's taking Will out for a drink and likes him. And he's talking about Jews. And now they're pushing America into a war with Germany, a plot engineered by the Jewish bankers. Let me tell you, the Jews in this country don't have long to wait. Soon they'll be found out and put enough of politics. How about come to my house for dinner next week? So this is, and then there's Will, kind of in shadow, very disillusioned and very hurt, obviously,
of course,
and frightened. And so Will was not only interested, as we'll see, I'm not sure where the slides, he was very concerned about the resurgence, not just anti-Semitism in general, but the resurgence of this completely false document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was Will actually, this book is about Will's investigation of where it came from and that it was a completely political maneuver done by Russian politicians using anti-Semitism to take attention off their own misdeeds. But you see it quoted, unfortunately, regularly. It's, I don't even like to look for it on the internet. this horrible slander and false document. So Will became really, really concerned, and the last thing he finished before he died was this book, the plot. So there's a couple of pages from it we can look at quickly.
Yeah.
And again, this is a guy 87 years old. This is pretty good for an 87-year-old.
It's really good.
Who's going to be dead in a month. This is pretty good. And there's sort of and obviously did a shitload of research for it. Next, please. And this character is never identified as Will, but it's clearly Will.
It's clearly Will, yeah.
I mean, he's investigating. He's going to different libraries, and he encounters this anti-Semitism firsthand. So
I mean, that one line, even if it is a fake, people should read the book because it reveals the Jews, is kind of just
sounds
emblematic
familiar, huh?
of a lot of things right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes. Unfortunately, Will was ahead of his time.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So this was the last thing he finished shortly before he died. Next, please.
Yeah.
And of course, from not that book, but from Contract with God and from Will's whole body of work, look, I'm sure Art Spiegelman would have done Mouse in some way, shape, or form. He'd done an earlier version of it in the 70s. But Will was sort of the pioneer for books with a great deal of either comics with Jewish content, with autobiographical content. And then, of course, Spiegelman takes it to the next level using quote unquote funny animals and still making it serious. But I mean, the whole world of graphic novels we have now, I imagine the people involved are too talented not to have surfaced, but I think Will really pioneered a trail and said, hey, if I can do this and I'm in my 60s and 70s, imagine what you young people can do. And he put his money where his mouth was that too, teaching at SVA.
Yeah.
I guarantee he didn't make a lot of money teaching and doing those textbooks of his, which people still use. And I think next, please.
Kick the door down.
Yeah, so this is one of them, Comics and Sequential Art, which I think is still a standard text. Next, please.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Will and Anne. I guess probably in the 90s, or maybe he died in 2005, so maybe a year or two before he died. Looks like they're at San Diego. Next. And here is Will and Jack Kirby. Will was not that florid, and Jack was not that pale, but it's the only picture of the two of them. One of the few pictures, and they're exactly the same age. It's one of the great comic book industry art form pictures of all time, I think. If somebody knows what they're doing, I'm sure with Photoshop you could balance out the colors, but really, why?
Why? I mean, it's a trick of the lighting. It's fine. I heard Kirby always called him boss. Didn't matter what he'd accomplished, or no matter what.
Oh, that's
what age
funny.
it was.
I didn't know that, but that. Well, I mean, I guess in terms of their seniority in the business, I guess Will was his, he had his own business before at a very young age.
And maybe he just got used to it, I'm thinking.
That's cute. Well, look, I know people who have that kind of relationship with people who haven't been their boss for 25 years and still call them boss, affectionately. Next, what do we have? I guess this is another one of the. This is a picture from, I think, an Ink Pot Awards at San Diego.
He has a mustache.
Will had a mustache for a while and sideburns, I guess, when that was fashionable in the late 60s. So there's Gil Kane, Kirby, who always looks cool, Stan, Steranko, Will Eisner, and Jerry Siegel. And I think it's half of another picture. I didn't have the other half, but it's a murderer's row of comic legends.
That's insane.
Next, please. And this is the story that I was presenting when Pfeiffer told me that he had been the writer of it. I think when he says he was the writer of it, he wrote it, but I think he always says anything he wrote that Will edited, and that he always felt he was channeling Will. So this is a story called 10 Minutes. Mm-hmm. Again, if you're worried about, there's a spoiler alert for this 70-year-old story, so I'm warning you now. But it's very much said, and Pfeiffer, his theory is that the spirit was Jewish and that he sort of was Eisner's avatar. and that even though his name was Denny Colt, that he was sort of a stand-in for young Will, and sort of had a lower middle class Jewish background. So this is that milieu. This is a tenement in the Bronx, the kind that both Will and Jules might have grown up in. And it's got, you know, a girl playing a name game with a ball, and a kid reading probably a comic book. And there's this guy, Freddie, and it will take, I mean, the story telegraphs its ending anyway. It will take you 10 minutes to read the story, a very short time in any man's lifetime. But these 10 minutes that you will spend here are an eternity for one man, for they are the last 10 minutes in Freddie's life. Freddie also happens to have the Spirit logo painted on his apartment building. That changes perspective as the camera. Next, so let's
And
go.
you don't see it either. You don't see the full Spirit logo.
No, and you have to almost be looking for it, you know, which I guess at this point, you know, readers would be looking for.
I have a question. Did they eventually
sure.
trademark this thing on the upper left, the Spirit section?
You know, I don't know if he did, probably, because he did trademark the Spirit, a version of the logo, the one that we saw on some of the on one of the kitchen sink books. There is a trademarked Spirit logo, and I would guess, again, that's a question more for Dennis Kitchen or for the Eisner Studios people. So we can go through this. I want the first few pages of what I want to.
It's this logo, right?
That's the logo. Yeah.
Okay.
Next page. Yep. And that was the 80th anniversary edition of the Spirit that came out earlier this year.
Yes.
So this is an archetypal kind of New York candy store. They had them still in my childhood. You know, it says candy, but it's cigarettes, magazines, comic books. It's a luncheonette. In the days before people had phones in their own apartments, you can see here. This was a candy store in the Bronx. This Pfeiffer and Will would have been familiar with it. He's playing pinball, and he's the, you know, it's got the feel of like a Richard Widmark film noir of the 40s. If you can think of any of those stories, Naked City, Cry of the City, anything with the word city in it, you know,
always works.
Yeah, any of those noirs that always had Richard Conte or Richard Widmark, and directed by Joseph H. Lewis. So that's the setting for this. It's about this guy Freddie, who's a loser, and he's decided, even though that the guy, the Louis who owns the candy store, is known him since he was a kid, he's going to rob the guy. I'm sorry, Max, not Louis, Max. Next, please. So he holds him up, and Max thinks he's kidding because he's known this guy since he was a little kid, and Freddie gets angry and shoots him, and he didn't mean, you know. So here's this horrible, tragic turn in Freddie's life, and it's a really hot day in the summer. Next, and so Eisner just builds up the story with these, you know, builds the tension, the violence, the guy. Freddie, you're one of the neighborhood boys. I knew you once. You was a kid. So it's this horrible, tragic moment. Next, please. And this is like a classic.
This is great. Yeah.
I mean, so some, you know, some neighborhood kids trying to be tough come in, and they want a soda, and oh look, Freddie's helping out. Oh, why aren't you sweet like Fred, Milty? Oh, so Freddie's a good boy. So hey, now cut it. I think the guy is kind of got sort of a hipster zoot suit kind of look. And then of course the girl sees there's blood on his cheek, and she sees the dead guy. And then, you know, so that scene where the sound effect really takes on a life of its own as Freddie runs. And yet Eisner here chooses to leave out the background except for the candy store building. I mean, it's really, you know,
it's a great touch.
Incredible, and that shadow beneath the guy's foot. I mean, this is Will friggin' Eisner, you know. I mean, next, please.
A lot of artists would either not put any backgrounds at all or put in the entire background.
Yeah, or make it, you know, or these days make a 2-page splash out of it, you know. And so this, and we don't, you know, this is Freddie then going through the neighborhood. You know, he's going, you know, he can't believe he did it. He's in this, and of course, Eisner uses that literal ticking clock. Every page starts. It's a minute later. You know, it's now 10:37, and everybody, and Freddie goes and hides. No, he doesn't hide in the theater. He goes into a bar where there's a television on, and next, please. I mean, I don't want to. And then finally, the spirit shows up. Remember the spirit? The spirit shows up with Commissioner Dolan, looking for directions to where that murder was, and Freddie thinks he's gotten away with it, except he hasn't. And the spirit, he's so nervous he drops all his money trying to get into the subway, and the spirit gives it back to him next. And
there it is.
And there it is. So that's the end of. The spirit has figured out that this guy is probably, if not the killer, then somehow involved. I'd like to speak to you. And he what does he do? Punches the spirit and tries to get onto the train and ends up being dragged. Which,
into the bar.
It's funny. This is the other story we saw today that ends up in a subway. Violence on the subway is master race also.
Yeah.
And then the punchline is, too bad he was only a kid. So many of them are kids, Dolan. They break them in young around here. I wonder just when it was that Freddie started on his crime career, which of course was 10 minutes ago.
10 minutes ago.
And then some guy you are, late, always late. But honey, it's only 10:45, 10 minutes late. What's 10 minutes in a man's life?
Interestingly, that means the spirit solved this case in 5 minutes. It's a great story. Yeah. This was also the one in, not the book, the Smithsonian Book of Superheroes. It was this and Gerhard's Chernobyl. That was my introduction to the spirit.
Yeah, well, they're the ultimate spirit stories. All right, let's really wrap this up. I just want to get back to Pfeiffer because Pfeiffer is a big part of the story, but this is the outer space spirit. And so this was Pfeiffer and Wally Woods. It was Pfeiffer's layouts, writing, Eisner's editing and co-creating, and Wally Woods drawing. And so Pfeiffer, obviously an Eisner fan as a kid, an Eisner colleague and assistant, and and then they were colleagues and friends through life. But so this is so years, cut to 50 years later, however many years later, more 60 years later, Pfeiffer has just finished about a year ago, a trilogy of graphic novels that are film noir, based, very political. Kill My Mother by Jules Pfeiffer. Next, it's a trilogy that involves a private detective who is dressed pretty much like the spirit. I mean, it's obviously a Pfeiffer story, but the panel layout and the perspective and the dialogue is very Eisner, to the point, next please, where the detective talks about, my father, Dennis Colt Hannigan, came to this country dirt poor. And then if you read, so that's all I have, but the third volume in the trilogy, which is called The Ghost Script. I don't want to give it away because you should read it, but there's a lot of Eisner in it. All right, next. This came out, this was a big book. This is a large size book that came out for an exhibition of Will's work in his centennial year. With that cover we saw from one of the kitchen sink spirits. Next. This came out, I think, a year or two ago. It's the Contract with God Curator's Edition. As I said, the artwork, the pencils and ink exist separately, and they were on exhibit at the Eater Gallery in Brooklyn about 5 or 6 years ago. And John Lind and Dennis Kitchen put together this curator's collection, which is beautiful. It's two volumes, and one is the pencils reproduced, and one is the inks. Next, please. So this is the set. So if you get a chance to read it, buy it, borrow it, just it's pretty, it gives you an incredible insight into Eisner's working process. Next, you'll see some of the insides. Yeah, that is Will Eisner's pencils, which exist, right? I mean, they're not, most comic book artwork you see, someone is, if it's done old school, if it's not done on a computer, somebody has penciled it and either they or someone else has gone over it in ink. And really the pencils then cease to exist because the ink is what the artwork is. Well, this is not that. And you can see where things were changed, where Eisner changed things between this and what ended up being inked and printed. So it's a fascinating book. Next, please. And that's Will, within a few, I'm not sure exactly, but certainly in his 80s, still drawing as he was doing till literally, the day he, if not literally the day he died, then not too long before it. Next, please. And that's Will and Stan from that DVD I was telling you about, the comic book greats. And if you think this is just an excuse for me to get in a couple of pictures of Stan, a picture of my book cover, you're right. But this is worth searching out, and so is this. And as I might have mentioned 3 hours ago, this is my biography of Stan Lee, which is from St. Martin's Press. There's quite a bit about Will in the book, actually, because their lives and careers sort of intertwined and crisscrossed. There was a time when Stan tried to get Will to take over Marvel Comics as editor-in-chief, which Will had no interest in doing.
Of course he didn't.
And it's from St. Martin's Press. The paperback just came out. I did the audiobook. There's a large type version if you need a large type book. And I'm available to come talk about it. If this was fun, then Danny at DannyFingeroth.com. Doy knows how to find me. I'm all over Facebook. And I guess one thing I just want to mention, Will had such a career, but the Eisner Awards, of course, are named after Will. And so was Will Eisner Week, which again, I mentioned about 2.5 hours ago. Will Eisner Week, we're still doing it this year. So if you want to do something to celebrate Will Eisner, graphic novels, free speech, the comics medium in general, drop me a line at DannyFingeroth.com or go to WillEisner.com, because we're still having Will Eisner Week next year, despite the COVID. We're going to find some way to make it work for people, a combination of live and virtual events. Any questions?
What a tour through history. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you for giving me the time to do it.
That was comprehensive enough that I asked all my questions beforehand. So
good. All right, Doy. So I think I'm going to get going.
Thank you very much.
Once I start speaking about Eisner, obviously, there's no shutting me up. So thank you for this opportunity, and everybody, you and everybody else, stay well, take care of yourselves and each other. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.